Before we move into a Q&A with our panelists, we wanted to provide a brief overview of Title IX at Vanderbilt, given there could be varying levels of knowledge among participants on today's call. We just want to sort of ensure that everyone has some foundational understanding of what Title IX is and what our current approach looks like, especially in an area that tends to change over time, as Provost Raber alluded to in her remarks. So I'm going to walk through some information and certainly welcome our panelists to chime in with any clarifications or additional information that they would like to share, and then we'll move into a Q&A. So as you may know, Title IX is a federal civil rights law that prohibits sex and gender discrimination in educational programs that receive federal financial assistance. And most people tend to know about Title IX as it relates to gender equity in athletics, but it's really much more expansive than that. And the conversations around its application to sexual harassment and sexual misconduct have really increased significantly in the past 15 years or more. At Vanderbilt, we have a dedicated Title IX office for our Title IX coordinator, Mary Roy, who's with us on the call today, and her team. They are housed within our equal access area alongside our equal opportunity and access office and our student access office. And they're really, responsible for our overall compliance with Title IX. And as part of the contingent of offices and departments and community members who are seeking to provide a welcoming, inclusive environment on our campus. The Title IX office has really a number of different functions that they perform, ranging from education and training on Title IX itself, prevention, mandatory reporting, to providing supportive measures for involved parties, to investigating reports of sexual misconduct. In addition to the Title IX office, there are several other offices and areas at the university that are very involved in our efforts to prevent and combat sexual violence on campus. We go to the next slide, please. The Project Safe Center for Sexual Misconduct Prevention and Response provides victim support and advocacy services, as well as a significant amount of the prevention education for our students. Project Safe is what we call a limited confidential resource, which means that the university has designated it as confidential by policy, with a few limited exceptions, and the Project Safe team is able to provide de-identified information to the Title IX office for statistical and tracking purposes. This status really allows students to work with someone at Project Safe for support without their information being shared unless and until they're ready to move forward with a process or a supportive measure that may require their information to be shared. Can we go to the next slide, please? And we also have Vanderbilt University Public Safety, and they protect, obviously, the safety and security of our campus community and have a variety of offices within their purview, including emergency preparedness, parking services, workplace safety, as well as our police department, which is a fully accredited police department that operates under a memorandum of understanding with the Metro Nashville Police Department. VUPD can assist students with reports to law enforcement, investigations, orders of protection, and any other processes that may come into play within sort of the criminal justice system. And Vanderbilt Public Safety also has a number of safety initiatives as well. And you can see some of those listed here. The Vandy Safe app, which has a lot of great features for safety and security, our blue light program, safety and lighting tours, self-defense classes, community service officers, and much more. Next slide, please. So with regard to the university's policies, there are really two that are at play here. One is the formal grievance protocol, and this one is required by the 2020 federal regulations and is a bit narrower in scope and jurisdiction than our historical sexual misconduct policies have been. We also maintain a sexual misconduct policy, which we really developed to be able to keep a little bit of those broader definitions for prohibited conduct. So you can see here across the policies, a number of behaviors that are prohibited related to sexual harassment, sexual assault, stalking, dating violence, domestic violence, sexual exploitation, retaliation, as well as any attempts facilitating, aiding, encouraging, concealing, or assisting in those behaviors. Next slide, please. So there are a variety of entry points a student may use to make a report or to receive support related to a Title IX incident. That can be through the Title IX office directly, through Project SAFE, through the police department, or through a faculty or staff member. And this is really intentional to try to allow students to begin where they're most comfortable and who they might be most comfortable with. And then there's coordination across all of these areas to ensure any required reporting, the provision of those supportive measures, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a bit, and assistance with investigations. Next slide, please. So as noted on the prior slide, faculty and almost all staff at Vanderbilt are what we call mandatory reporters. And this means that they're required to provide any information they receive about an incident of sexual misconduct to the Title IX office. So in addition to the professional staff, this can also include some student staff members, like our resident advisors and head residents who live in our halls, as well as ViewSectors and other orientation leaders. Next slide, please. Title IX provides a variety of ways to make a report, and mandatory reporters can utilize these, or students themselves can use any of these methods to make a report to the Title IX office. There is an online reporting form that connects to the Title IX office's system, a phone number, an email, and students or mandatory reporters can also walk in and visit the Title IX office as well to make a report. Next slide, please. So after a report is submitted, the focus is on outreach, supportive measures, and information about options. There is a common sort of misunderstanding that an investigation automatically begins when a report is submitted, and that is not the case. The Title IX office reaches out to really engage with the student related to resources, supportive measures, and options for moving forward. And all of this occurs regardless of whether they have submitted or filed a formal complaint. So the student really has some agency to decide whether they wish to engage at that time, or if they do, then some agency to review those options and supportive measures to work with the Title IX office on the best way forward for them. Next slide, please. So a few notes about resources. In addition to Project SAFE, which is really designed as the central hub for resources in this area, the university has several other confidential resources that students can access. And those are the University Counseling Center, the Student Health Center, and then the Center for Spiritual and Religious Life for our chaplains when they're acting in their individual spiritual advising capacity. Student Health and the Vanderbilt University Medical Center are also able to provide forensic exams through a sexual assault nurse examiner or a SANE nurse. And that was an initiative that the university worked with the medical center on to move forward as an additional resource for students, in particular, the availability of those exams at the Student Health Center as opposed to at the medical center. Next slide. We have some animation. Our student care network also has additional avenues for in-the-moment support that are available to students through our student care coordination office and the Center for Student Wellbeing, both of which hold drop-in hours and provide other services across campus. And this is in addition to all the services that are provided by the Counseling Center and, of course, Project SAFE, both of which have hotlines or call lines where students can call at any time and speak to an on-call staff member. Next slide. And then just a note about supportive measures. You may be wondering, what is a supportive measure? They can really take a lot of different forms. And so we've provided some examples of some of the more common supportive measures that we provide. And those can include things like no contact directives, which prohibit communication, direct or indirect, between the parties. Academic accommodations, mostly through what we call dean's notifications, which ask faculty members to provide consideration to students related to their coursework. Housing changes, transportation assistance, work schedule changes, and access to other services that a student may need. Next slide. So we have this chart that's available on the Title IX and Project Safe websites that provide some more information about resources, confidentiality, and supportive measures. And there's obviously lots more information in general about services, processes, and policies that can be found on their websites as well. So just wanted to highlight that as another place to look for more information about Title IX and our approach to resources and support. So we'll now, I think, unless our panelists have anything they would like to add to that quick overview, we will move into our Q&A portion of the program. We did have some questions that were submitted in advance, so we will work through those and also take questions through the webinar. You should be able to submit questions using the Q&A feature that's available on your screen. And so we'll work through as many questions as we possibly can before our time concludes today. So to begin our Q&A portion, I think we will start with Kara for this question and also ask Stephanie and Mary to provide any insights or information they would like to provide as well. So our first question relates to the drastic underreporting of sexual assault nationally, and is asking if we could talk a little bit about that, and also specifically how Vanderbilt encourages survivors to feel safe to provide reports to the university.
Well, sexual assault is something that still remains underreported nationwide, and that's sadly the norm, at least initially in the aftermath of the incident. For a variety of reasons. Students tell us that sometimes they're not sure what happened to them, if it constitutes sexual assault, or sometimes they say they aren't sure it was serious enough. They are worried about getting in trouble. They're worried about their parents finding out, and they're really worried about what other students are going to say. They experience some speculation and gossip and sometimes cyberbullying related to that. And so, they're really processing trauma and then thinking about what happens if they tell this person or that person, and how are those people going to respond. And what the university has done deliberately, and as you saw in those slides, is create those multiple points of entry. We start messaging them before they even arrive on campus, quite intentionally, to tell them, here are your resources. And then we introduce the people and the teams behind those resources in person when they arrive on campus at orientation. At move-in, we have contact information, we have a lot of signs, we have information in the app, but we want them to meet and build relationships with the faculty heads of house, view scepters, faculty and staff, and know the wide network that we have, and that there's no wrong way to start. You can use a confidential resource or one of the many other resources that will connect them to the resources that have more of a specialization in this area. But we have purposefully educated and trained and promoted all of these resources widely across the university so that wherever they land, they can get the support or reporting options that they need.
Yes, that I agree with everything Kara said. And I just want to reiterate the fact that, in our office, we make sure that we honor a person's agency to the greatest extent that we possibly can. And that if somebody does not choose to pursue an incident report for whatever reason, we honor that as whenever we can. Our first step always is to provide resources and support so that they know we get them to where they want to be. If it's our office, we keep them in our office. If it's Project Safe, we send them to Project Safe. We walk them over. If they don't know where it is, we connect them with Student Care Coordination Network if that's where they'd rather be. We make sure the first thing we do is get them to where they need to be. And then we offer them the supportive measures that they might not know what they want. So our supportive measures manager will sit down and talk through with them what they're experiencing and then say, oh, it sounds like maybe a dean's notification might help you. And then we get that for them. So that's the first step in our process. And then we say, okay, and then we walk through what a Title IX process might look like. So to help them understand that our office does that will help them, I think, be more willing to file the incident report and be more willing to come forward to us. And it's getting that message out to campus. I think that that will help, at least at Vanderbilt, people to come forward.
Stephanie, anything to add? Okay. Our next question, I think, really is for you and Mary as well. And it relates to data. I'm wondering if you could share any insights about data related to complaints or reports filed, investigations, findings, things of that nature.
Right. As I think I just said, we do outreach to all persons that are identified in the incident reports that come into our office. Some of those reports are de-identified, as I think you just explained and Kara just explained, from the limited confidential resource that we get from Project Save. Some of the people, a majority of the people that come through, need supportive or other interim measures in order to be able to most fully participate in their Vanderbilt experience. So we make sure, to whatever extent we can, that we connect them with those, whether they're through our office or through a different office on campus. The first thing we will do, if they choose to engage with us, again, they may choose not to engage with us, which is 100% okay as well. Again, it's their agency and it's their choice whether they want to participate or not. We honor that choice. We will keep their information on file for as long as we have it. And if they choose in a year to come back and say, I need something, we'll reopen the case and we'll get them whatever they need. It's not time limited. We don't throw their information away after a certain amount of time if they choose not to engage with us. Sometimes it does take them a while and we will engage with them on their own schedule. So of the nearly, I think we got just about 500 incident reports over the last academic year. Of those 500, the majority chose to receive supportive measures. 18 people chose to file formal complaints. And of those 18, we could either have a formal investigation. Actually, that's not the correct slide, Mitch. That's a calendar year. The academic year is about 480 some odd. So it's a little bit different depending on how you slice it. So the academic year is about 480 something. And of those, 18 people filed formal complaints. And when you file a formal complaint, it can go either through a formal investigation, which is what most people understand to be a Title IX investigation, which is investigative interviews, a hearing, a determination, potentially an appeal, a sanction. Or we have a new process, this informal resolution process. 14 people chose to go through the informal resolution process, which is both parties agreed to, and then we use our informal resolution manager who facilitates a negotiation between the parties to come to a solution. And of those 14 who chose to enter the informal resolution process, nearly 80% successfully negotiated a solution to their matter. So that's the last, sort of a snapshot of the last academic year.
Thank you. And you actually touched on something that was another question we received, which is about the informal resolution process. And that was a newer process that we implemented. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what that process is, the evolution of that process since we started it. You and Stephanie could both weigh in on this.
Thank you. As you all heard, we had new regulations implemented in 2020 in the Title IX space. And with that came a lot of direction around adjudication of Title IX matters. Much of the focus was on the hearing requirement in our formal process for conduct that falls within that formal grievance protocol GL spoke about earlier. But in addition to that, we were also given the opportunity to expand some options around informal resolution. And as Mary just spoke to, we have implemented that going into 2021, have seen some success in that. That's been an evolutionary process though, as it was new for us. And so I'll let Mary speak a little bit more to what happened as we stood up that process, brought in a full-time person to add to the Title IX team to lead that process, and where we've gone from there.
Thanks, Stephanie. Yeah, anytime after a formal complaint is filed, informal resolution becomes an option. We let the parties know that it's available. And so what happens to trigger the process is one or the other of the parties requests it. Statistically, in our process, it's been about half and half. Either one party or the other will request it. And if the other party agrees, we pause the formal investigative process so that the informal resolution process can sort of run its course. Our dedicated staff member will prepare in advance separately with each party to see what a successful resolution might look like for that party. After that happens, we will schedule a day for this informal resolution session. And then in that session, we work to facilitate the process between the parties, and the parties can have their advisors present with them. They don't have to be in the same space, whether it's a physical space or virtual space. We're moving a lot more now that sort of COVID is, I won't say behind us because it probably never will be, but it's a little bit more endemic these days, so that we're doing a lot more work in person now, which the students really seem to be connecting with better. So we're doing a lot more work in person in our office. We have separate spaces with different ways in and out so that the students can be separate. So we do a lot more advanced prep work now as our process has evolved, which helps us in this sort of final session to move a little bit more swiftly to reach a solution or an agreement between the parties in this mediation, if you will, session. So if we get there, if the parties reach this kind of shared understanding concerning an outcome, then we'll work with our campus partners like Student Affairs to make sure that the outcome that they've settled on works and is in the best interest both of the parties and of our process. And then if it is, we memorialize the terms of that agreement and work with the parties once we get their signatures to make sure that they follow through, right? Because we have to make sure that they fulfill whatever the agreement is that they came to. And once that all happens, the case is resolved and we can close it. It gives the parties, again, it goes back to agency, right? It gives them so much more agency over the outcome. And I think that really resonates with them.
Mary, isn't it true as well, the parties at times are able to agree to things, some sort of, whether it's attendance or participation in an activity, things that typically wouldn't be available to them in a formal resolution process. So
Yes.
There really is a lot of self-determination for the parties to be able to work out something that's meaningful to them in a process over which they have some more control.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. We're seeing that a lot.
Great. Thank you both. So Kara, I think the next one is for you related to prevention programming. So there's some acknowledgement about the what Project SAFE offers in terms of a lot of prevention programming. but that it seems really geared towards first-year students. Can you maybe talk a little bit about prevention programming for upper division students and plans for programming moving forward?
Yeah, sure. The focus on first-year students is really intentional. Just by the way, it's by design because they do face the highest risk. Really, their first 8 weeks is a period of heightened risk on any college campus. So it's not just because they're new and coming in, it's because we know that they're transitioning from one life phase to another and learning to live on their own in the college campus and making decisions. And they might be exposed to, different types of social activities. And so that's by design, and that's key. And that's really also a channeling of resources where we know the risk is, and hopefully engaging in prevention, right? So we want to get ahead of it as soon as they get here and build this into their sense of community and responsibility to one another. So that is by design. Then the sophomores are the next group that faces the next highest risk. So we work to reach them as well. So we'll start. We do front load it by design, starting with the online module, following with part and orientation, following with scenarios during true life. So even our campus partners are in front of the new students. They're also embedding these messages in the alcohol education program, in presentations about Student Care Network. We reach out and work with the first year halls throughout the early fall semester to offer bystander intervention. That's all designed to set them up for success. And then we reinforce those messages throughout their remaining time with us at Vanderbilt. So sophomores are then our next group of focus. Juniors and seniors, though, we do treat differently, and that's also intentional. They're experiencing college differently at that point. They tend to be older. Some of them might be old enough to drink alcohol legally. They also are thinking about how they're interacting sexually in different ways. And so we do tailor the message to reach them. But we're also thinking then about sending them out into the workplace. So they're getting training on education or training on communication and boundaries and sexual harassment prevention. And this is part of a plan that we're in the middle of, a strategic plan to educate our students and have them thinking about sexual wellness more broadly, so that we're reaching them in ways that are research based and evidence-based at each stage of their development, right? So we're incorporating what we know from student development theory to reach the first years in that life phase that they're in, but to speak to juniors and seniors in different ways, sometimes because they think they've heard it before too. So we have to attract them into a different program so that they come in, but we reinforce what we've already taught, these like building blocks of consent education, early bystander intervention, so that they're getting more understanding about coercion and other aspects of it that can seem, the students say, gray area to them early on. And then advanced bystander intervention, which includes scenarios and experiences that they might interact with when they're in the workplace, like with a supervisor or peer-to-peer in environments where there are happy hours and other things that can be normed in certain professions, but still pose risk.
Thank you. So we have a question about training for faculty and staff. And Stephanie, I'm wondering if you could start us off, and Mary and Kara could weigh in as well. About what training is available for faculty and staff, including training that goes beyond mandatory reporter obligations.
I actually will let Mary start and then Kara speak as well. They're on the ground with training. I want them to speak to that.
So Mary, take it away.
Well, I mean, currently we offer overall training on our Title IX process to faculty, staff, students, student groups, registered student organizations, Greek life, athletics, anybody who will listen to us. We did a 50th anniversary training initiative last year, which was fairly successful. We are partnering with Project Safe. We did a targeted training with Project Safe last week, I think it was, for Sexual Assault Awareness Month. We're available for targeted training on any part of our process upon request. And we're looking at developing additional training around bystander intervention, around consent education, around a lot of the important sort of issues that we tend to see crop up in cases that come before our office, that we're hoping that if we can get a lot of good education, solid education around, it will lead to a lot more healthy relationships on our campus and a corresponding decrease in the incident reports that will come to both of us.
I'll just add that for several years now, Title IX and Project SAFE have offered a joint presentation, as we do all of the time. But this one's called the Faculty Workshop for Reporting and Responding to Incidents of Sexual Misconduct. So it does start with reporting obligations. Here's how. We show a slide like you saw at the beginning, which shows you that link or the phone call or, emailing Mary and her team. But it's always been paired with how to respond, taking what we know from how survivors present in the aftermath, what their fears might be, coming at that with data and validating the survivor experience and incorporating what we know about the neurobiology of trauma to really help inform our campus community that their role is to provide support and to connect with resources and let the trained professionals in respective areas do what it is that they're trained to do, right? So that we work as a team to do the best by the person who's been targeted or harmed or harassed in a tailored fashion. And that's what Mary's team and my team are trained to do. Like when she was discussing, we brainstorm with them about like what supportive measures would be helpful to you. Do you feel safe? And understandably, our faculty and staff are here to do what we hired them to do. And they have expertise in things far, different than what I'm doing, but we want them to feel equipped to connect with the resources. And so there's a big portion of the training that's not just you're a mandatory reporter. It's like, and here's how, and here's why, and here's the type of follow-up and care that we can provide to the students, but that we can also provide to you, to your unit, to your department, because sometimes these things are known to others, and that does impact a sense of trust and faith in systems. And we want to explain what we're doing and how quickly we're responding. And here's why you might know more about this and not get to receive certain information about that. But it doesn't mean that we're not taking this very seriously. We are. It's just we're protecting the rights and the agency, as Mary has said, of the individuals involved. And as Stephanie has said too, it's like this has become increasingly complex, particularly in recent years, as in the legal landscape changes. And that's a lot to ask of our various faculty and staff members to stay on top of. And so we're trying to streamline that as much as possible so that they know what they need to know and really accomplish the most important thing, which is getting a person connected to resources.
Thank you. So we had a question come in that I think is probably going to be again for Stephanie and Mary. And this one is about whether the university has standard timelines in the policies for investigating and acting upon a complaint.
So I'll begin and again, let Mary, as the person who operates in this space all the time, give more explanation and greater examples for this. But the timeline has also evolved over time. You'll hear that again and again from us because this is politely put a dynamic field. We get a lot of different guidance year over year. So for a while it was 60 calendar days, then you might see 90 business days or 90 calendar days. There's not a, broadly speaking from the federal government, there's not a strict directive at this time, though we may receive one in the new regulations. We tend to work with a 90 business day figure, but truly that's non-specific. If a case can be resolved before that, we'll resolve it before that. We don't let things lapse to reach 90 days. Also, however, some cases are more complex, and that can mean a myriad of things. We may have a large number of witnesses that we need to interview, and scheduling with all of those people and around important exams or projects or leaves of absence or other major events. We sometimes have folks say, there's something really important happening in their life at a particular time, and they don't want that week to be the week they sit with Title IX to talk about what is one of the worst events they experienced. We try to work with our students to support their engagement with the community, continuing on with their lives, while we also work to resolve this, to respond to their desire for us to engage with them in this process. So as we do that, that's one part. Another may be acquiring certain information. We gather as much information as we can. That can be documentary, can be video evidence, other means. We will take the time it takes to do that as well. We are often under the dual mandate of being both prompt and thorough. And as I'm sure you all understand, those two don't always fit nicely together. And it's the judgment of the team on what's necessary for each case. But our commitment is to continue to decrease the time to resolution. We are deeply committed to speeding, maybe the wrong word, but decreasing the time to resolution, because we understand the powerful impact of having an open case for all people involved in that case. It is stressful. It is a part of life here when that's happening. And we want to get those resolved with integrity, but as promptly as possible. Mary, I said more than I intended to, so I don't know, but I want to offer you the opportunity to respond as well.
Well, I think the one thing that I would add to that, I 100% agree with everything you said, and I don't think I could have said it better myself. But the one thing I would also add is time moves differently for us in our office and our investigators and myself than it does for our students who are, they live life a semester at a time. And something that seems like it's not a long time for us, it might be a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, for us is a third of a semester for them, half of a semester for them, and they're not here for very long. And so we always have to remember that as we're working through these cases, that what doesn't seem like it might be a long time to us is, a quarter of their career if they're a student. And we have to always be mindful of that as we, time is relative, as we all know, and what doesn't seem like it might be a long time for us could be an eternity for our students. And we always have to remember that.
Thank you both. Chief Washington, I wanted to go over to you. We've received a few questions about timely warnings or security notices, and concerns about them sort of being impersonal and insensitive. Can you maybe just provide a little bit of context for those messages and sort of what they are and why we send those?
Thank you, Jill. One of the things we have is anytime we get a notice of a sexual assault on campus, we're required by the Crime Awareness and Campus Security Act, often known as the CLARI Act, to do an actual notice. And often when we do those notices, we get our information, and our reports generally comes over through, it can be through a direct report, or it can be through our Project Safe group, which is something that to me is pretty amazing on our campus, that we have a group such as Project Safe that can support the students, not only giving them through education or follow-up support, but also continuous support as we go through any kind of on our side, an investigatory process. But also on the sexual notices, when we get a report, we're required to notify the campus community of that a sexual assault report has been filed. But quite often, GL, those reports, as they're filed sometime as a delayed report, or it's been a length of time. But more often than not, we have very limited information. And at this institution, we try and respect the privacy of the victim, and we do our security notices based on the information that we receive. And quite often we don't have a broad amount of information. And so sometimes we're just able to put in those notices just the information that we have at that time. But we are required to notify the campus community that an incident did occur.
Thank you. Stephanie and Mary, we've gotten a couple questions in about advisors. And so wondering if you all could speak a little bit to advisors that are available for complainants and respondents and what that looks like within the process.
Certainly, we'd be happy to. Again, as a part of that adjudication process, we spoke about coming out of the 2020 regulations. The university is required to provide advisors for those who don't have them for the hearing portion, so that those folks can ask questions on behalf of the students who are involved or others who are involved. But another theme you've heard this evening is the complexity of the process and our understanding of how complex this is and how complex it becomes. And so the university made a choice to offer advisors throughout the process for both complainants and respondents at our expense. We identify folks from outside the university community and engage them to be available. We identify folks who are experienced in navigating process. So many of those folks have legal training and may even be attorneys, but they're not serving as attorneys. Their goal is really to help our students understand how to move through a process that has a lot of steps, that has certain requirements. One, you've heard reference to a formal complaint. Under these new regulations, it's incredibly rare that we as a university can proceed with an investigation unless we have a signed formal complaint that someone wants to move forward. There are technicalities like that we want folks to understand and be able to navigate as easily as possible. We do some of that through procedures that we create in the Title IX office to make that as smooth and simple as possible, but also these resources that we offer. I know some of the questions arise occasionally about the time available. We do not limit the time spent when the university asks time from a party. So if someone is asked to be interviewed or come back for another interview, if they choose to engage in informal resolution, and there are those preparatory meetings we spoke of, and then the conference itself, the hearing, and any formal meetings that are a part of that hearing process, all of that is covered as a part of what we offer. There are additional hours available, a certain portion we currently have 4 for the investigative process and 5 assigned for the adjudication process, where the parties can work with their advisor to understand what they may need to do, to think about how they might engage. We encourage things like helping the students understand they can name witnesses, or that they can identify information that may be relevant, making sure that they're prepared and feel comfortable as possible going into an interview or other process. But what I also want to identify is that advisor is only one part of the broader resources you've heard us speak to tonight that are available to our students. So a person can work with one of these advisors and have an advocate that they're working with in the Project Safe Center. They can have a counselor in our counseling center. They can have a relationship with our student care coordination team. They may be working with PD on a case as well with Chief Washington and his team. There are many, many resources across campus. This person is designed to fill that. How do I navigate this complicated process while I'm also trying to live my life as a student on campus?
Thank you. So I want to go back to Chief Washington. We've gotten a couple sort of overlapping questions around safety and security on campus. And was wondering if you could talk a little bit about security and safety as it relates to students walking around campus, ability for students to have escorts, and lighting, concerns about lighting in certain areas of campus.
Okay. One of the things we have here is, as I always say, we have a fully comprehensive police department that operates 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. And in that department, we have about 91 sworn, what we call post-certified or state-certified law enforcement officers. But we also have about 125 to 135 what we call community service officers. So we're always out there, as well as a 24-hour communication center. and we're always out there patrolling. But we also have things like we have our blue light phones. We have an extensive number of blue light phones that are strategically placed throughout the campus and the medical center campus as well. And we also have what we call our Vandy Safe app, which is a very a robust program where students can contact VUPS, even to do things such as a walking escort, where they have an escort where it's done, or a virtual escort where they can contact a communication officer and they can work with them as they go to any specific location. But every year on the campus, we do what we call a safety and lighting walking tour, where we go around the campus. We work with plant operations, real estate, and other university partners to just walk around the campus and see areas that the lighting may not be up to par, because our campus is a living environment. You ever been around Vanderbilt? It's always changing. There's new buildings or there's adjustments or what have you. So, we try and make sure that we have a campus that is safely lit, but we combine that with some of the other tools, as I mentioned. There's the Vandy Safe app, as well as, and also I want to mention that we have what we call our Vandy ride service, which it operates from 6 p.m. to 1 a.m., where we have a continuous a set of buses that take students from one end of the campus to the other end of the campus, as well as take students that are living in areas contiguous to campus to their apartment residence. And so we try and have a lot of services in place that can operate and assist students. But we also have situations where if students have an incident that has occurred and they feel like they need a specific escorts or what have you, we work with them on that. And we work with our campus partners, whether it's the Title IX office or whether it's a campus Project Safe and the Dean of Students office, and to be able to provide those specific modes of needs, to address those specific needs for those students.
Great, thank you. We've received a number of questions about transcript notation, so I just want to make a note about that. We are getting close to time, and I know the Chancellor will want to close us out with some final thoughts. But with regard to transcript notations, we have shared that question with our university registrar for review as well. Currently, the practice that they employ is to put permanent notations onto the transcript. So that would be for an expulsion. And all other notations are made on the academic record and in the disciplinary record. It's my understanding that there's a lot of state laws that can be in play, depending on where you're looking across the country, in terms of either requiring certain things to be on the transcript or not permitting certain things to be on the transcript. And there's also some professional organization guidance about best practices as it relates to notations on transcripts that can come into play in this area as well, and with some preference for temporary removals or temporary disciplinary statuses to be addressed through a disciplinary check process that many institutions employ at application. But we have provided those questions and concerns to the registrar to review further with that guidance and see if there are any other clarifications or things that we'd like to make on that. So I know we have some other questions that are lingering in the Q&A here. Specific questions I know you have for a particular one of our panelists. We are all available to you if you'd like to contact us afterward with any specific question you have. Any of the panelists will be happy to talk with you further about those questions. And I do want to give Chancellor Diermeier a few minutes here to wrap us up, to provide any final thoughts and comments as we conclude.
Well, thank you, GL, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon. As you could tell from the discussion, this is a very challenging area. It's personal, it's emotional, but then there's all the legal, regulatory, and then of course the day and age we live in. This has also become a political football. So there's changes that happen every few years, which makes this a kind of almost a moving target for us as we're adjusting. I want to thank Kara and Mary and Stephanie and August and GL for their great work on that. You probably got a little bit of a sense of, like, hopefully how committed we are to this, but also like that this is not easy. And as we're thinking about this, the first and most important thing is education and prevention. And we make sure that we don't have to deal with these issues. And Project SAFE, which is a resource that's distinct to Vanderbilt, is just doing a super job at that. And as you heard a little bit, intentionality, that the needs that freshmen have are different from sophomores and juniors, and we're really trying to find a way to reach these students in a way that's developmentally appropriate for them. And then I wanna point out one last thing that Kara said, which is like the one of the most important things is to getting a person connected to the resources that they need. And this is something where we know this from the mental health area as well. It's like getting people connected and then providing them with the support during these very difficult moments of their life and challenges that they have is really, really critical. So part of the communication about part of why we're doing this and why we're having sexual violence prevention week and month and events like that is exactly that, is to create awareness and to make sure that our students engage in prevention, education, and then also reach out so that they can really receive the support that's available for them. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to you, GL, to close us off. And thanks again for everyone for their great hard work on this and for everyone for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you, Chancellor Diermeyer, and thank you to everyone who joined. And again, if you have any specific questions that we didn't get to, please feel free to reach out to any of the panelists. We're happy to talk with you further about this. And we wish you all a good evening.